Welcome, and my name is Diane Meyerfeld. Thank you for joining today's webinar on grant programs for farmers. I am the Sustainable Agriculture Coordinator for UW-Madison Extension. All right, without further ado, today we are going to hear from Margaret Krome and Wren Almitra about the basics of designing a good grant project and about where to look for funding sources. I encourage you to also tune into this Thursday's webinar, where we will talk more specifically about several of the grant programs that are available to farmers in Wisconsin. Both Margaret and Wren are with the Michael Fields Agricultural Policy Institute, which is a nonprofit in southeastern Wisconsin that has done a lot of outreach around grant programs related to agriculture. Margaret is the Institute's policy director, and Wren is the grants advisor for the Institute. Wren's grant advising services are available free of charge to farmers in Wisconsin and the north central region of the US. And now I would like to turn things over to Margaret Krome.
Great. Thank you so much, Diane. And I'm just going to say, Wren, take a moment to wave a little bit or say something so people know who you are. Yeah, thanks. Just so you see faces and know who it is who's about to be talking. So I'm going to jump right into screen sharing mode here. So we're so pleased to be able to join today, and it's fun to have so many people coming on a nice sunny day in Wisconsin. Nice to have you take an hour and a half of your time. We are firm believers in the virtues of learning how to write grant proposals. My hunch is a bunch of you have already done some of that, and we'll come to that later and invite your input as we go along. But first, just thought I'd give you a quick sketch of what we are planning to do. Hang on, let me tell my machine how to go forward. There we go. And we are again with the Michael Fields Ag Institute located in East Troy, Wisconsin. Today's workshop is 3 basic topics, and we're going to add in a fourth if you would like a little bit on that. And the first one is, how do you design a good project? You have a great idea. How do you think about constructing it? There are a bunch of questions you might want to ask and ways to think about it. No point in going and looking for funding if you haven't designed a really good project. But once you have got a really good project, you've thought it through, you've done all the things we'll talk about, then you'll need to go, where do you find funding? And that's the second segment. And then the third is basics of grant writing. And as we go through these, just to say, we're going to pause, as Diane said, after each and take just a few questions and then have a longer Q&A at the end. So if you've got questions, be sure to put them into the chat and Diane will help facilitate that as we go. So we're starting by designing sound projects. You have a great idea. Are you ready to pursue funding? How do you know? So Wren, you take it away for this first segment.
Great, thanks, Margaret. Just want to do a quick sound check. Is it still sounding okay?
Excellent.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Okay, so often as a grants advisor, I get calls from folks who have great ideas for a project and don't know where to start. Sometimes it becomes apparent pretty quickly that they may not quite be ready for funding yet. And so that's a different conversation with different resources. Right. I think the following questions that we're going to go over help you identify, like, yes, I'm definitely ready. I have all these components, but also, as Margaret said, really help you start develop that idea so we can move forward. So we're going to go through just kind of like a series of prompts, kind of things you should be thinking about as you're looking to further flesh out your idea. So the first one, of course, is what problem or opportunity are you addressing? So I think both and, those are two sides of the one coin, often. And ultimately, what are your goals and your measurable objectives? So again, goals are your destination. Where are you trying to get to? That problem you're trying to solve, your objectives, or what are the steps to get there? Very often grant proposals might ask for long-term versus short-term goals. So you'll want to be thinking about those once you actually start developing a proposal. But the big picture, what are we trying to do, and what are the ways we can get there? And then the following questions are, what resources do we have? So have others addressed this issue before? There are a number of ways to figure this out. I highly recommend always looking for past grant recipient projects through USDA and SARE and other funders. Those are often listed on their website. In fact, to fill out a SARE proposal, which we'll talk more about later, I believe, that's one of the funders we'll discuss. They actually often, for many of their grant programs, want you to identify other programs or other projects that have happened that have been funded on this topic. So anyway, look and see who's done this before, if at all possible, through a funder's website, or just if you have colleagues or other groups that have gotten funding and have addressed a similar issue, what can you maybe build off of that? What can you extend from those previous projects and learn from what they did? Who else might care about your project, and should they be involved? So these could be partners, other nonprofit organizations, other farmers, constituents in your community that you're trying to feed. Really think about your network that could really benefit and help you build your project. Sorry, the chat is covering up one of the questions here. Okay. And then next question, what's your main strategy to address your problem? We're going to be kind of further talking about that as well. Again, that kind of ties into the first one, your objectives, kind of how you're going to get there.
Just to pause as we go, before we do the next slide, just to say, I think that in general, that's an important question to ask as you're taking on any project, and to force yourself to not just take the first good idea that you've gotten. It's probably a very good idea, but there might be other ones. And I think it's really helpful to force yourself to say, here are several different ways we could do this. And I'm going to just pause for a second and give you an illustration of this. This very workshop is the consequence of having worked for very many, many years doing work on getting funding for federal programs. I coordinated the appropriations grassroots campaign across the country for 20-something years. And in the course of that, very early on, I thought, man, we're working so hard to make this thing happen. These programs get funded, and I wonder if people even know that they existed. So the very goal, the problem that we faced, looking at this page right here, you could say that one of the problems was there were a lot of people that could use programs that didn't know about them. So that's kind of converts itself nicely into a goal. One of our goals is having more people, more farmers, and I will say particularly we target underserved farmers, but any farmers. We want them to know what programs are out there and how to access them. And there's some measurable objectives, might be how many workshops per year we do, what kind of an audience, how are they evaluated, those could be some examples. And then I just want to say, when you come down to thinking about strategies, this bottom point here, think about the fact that there's lots of ways you could do that. You could do a video. You could do handouts. You could do in-person workshops. You could do webinars. And we have, over the years, chosen opportunities to do things that are a bit interactive, because we do, in fact, learn from you as well. But this webinar is a strategy among many. And so that's just to say, as we evaluate the different ways to do a thing, there might be several reasons you choose this one, not that one, but you ought to have several options before you go forward. Keep on. Go on, Wren.
Great. Thanks, Margaret. So other questions to consider. So what's a realistic project timeline? So again, you have this idea, you have this project you want to do. If you need it to start tomorrow, there's a good chance you're not going to find a grant, in time to start your project tomorrow. So really want to think about, your full timeline from start to finish. If it feels like it's going to be a longer project, multiple goals maybe within this project timeline, you might need to break it up into different sections. And so thinking about how your project could be actually delineated into different timelines that might align with different funding opportunities. And again, we'll talk more about kind of how to align your project with funding opportunities in a little bit here. So, but just really being clear about what your expectations are around your project. Then we kind of touched on this a little bit already, but what resources does your project require? So we talked earlier about like what is your network, but what is actually needed to make this happen? And resources can come in many different forms. So of course, the people power, whether it's staff already existing or staff needed, the actual amount that you're going to need. And we'll talk more about budgets later. What materials or supplies or equipment do you need? And those are very specific examples of language, that's used in grants that have very different meanings. And so you really just kind of want to take stock of what you are going to need to make this successful. And then what do you already have? So just taking stock again. Who else needs to know about your project and what's the best way to reach that audience? Margaret kind of touched on that as an example earlier with the grant they were writing in terms of getting people to know about your work and identifying, again, those best outreach mechanisms, whether that's doing webinars, whether that is going out into the community, being at a farmer's market, talking to people, whatever it is. There are kind of a number of different tools you can identify what the best outreach is. Obviously, social media is a great tool as well, but not everybody uses that. So you're going to probably know best based on your community and your geography. But again, that's part of your inventory collecting of the best way to reach folks. And then measuring and evaluating your project's outcomes. So this is something that's great to think about as early as possible, because that's going to be in pretty much any grant you write, is the reviewers really want to know what the expected outcomes are, but then how you're going to measure and evaluate them. And so some grants, it's as simple as, we'll do a quick survey at the end of our project or the end of our event. Others want really more intensive evaluative processes. It just kind of depends. So if you can think about that from the beginning, it's really going to help you out once you get to that point of developing the grant. Also, this really helps you, I feel like, hone in your idea even more, really helping you identify what those outcomes are, what your expectations are for your grant. That can be one of the more difficult parts, I think, sometimes in filling out an application.
Really good. Great, thanks. So we're going to pause for just a second here. I'm going to stop sharing and give a chance for others to ask questions, or if you have any comments. I suspect several of you, for example, on that last slide, might have thought, what resources do we have? And of those, what resources do we need? And of those, which ones do we have? Anybody on here written grant proposals before? Just raise your hand for just a quick sec. We're going to do a survey later on to find out. So I see a bit of that hands up. So if you would be interested, just take a second and put in the chat, what did that remind you of from a proposal writing point of view? We're doing it just, how do you design a good project? But that question of what do you have? What skin do you have in the game? You could say, what does that remind you of from your grant writing experiences? You can put it into the chat if it strikes you as in any way. So I'll just tell you what I'm thinking. Yes, a letter of support. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And one of the other things I'm thinking is it's kind of related to the match question. Yes, matching funds. I'm seeing it coming in now. So I think that as you're writing a proposal, and even as you're designing your project, you want to look at the landscape and say, all of the things that we need are X, Y, Z. And it happens that we actually have X. What we really need is Y and Z. The reason to do that is it allows you to be more dexterous as you're starting to think about funding. It gives you the latitude to think, now this funder might make sense for Y, and maybe we could use X as match for Z or whatever. It just allows you to be as intentional as you can be. And I see one of the other things I'm hoping to see happen, Brad Spalding is already doing it. And that is, please feel free to chime in with each other, ask questions, and share your thoughts with each other, because this is a community gathering hole here. This is a watering hole. We're wanting you to weigh in. Any other questions anybody wants to ask before we move on? Do we think a business plan is an appropriate first step? As a scientist, writing a business plan is daunting without resources. Thanks for that question. I think for some proposals, business plans make sense. For some, they don't make as much sense. But what they are doing is asking some of those same elemental scaffolding kinds of questions. Just in case it's helpful to know, there are often resources available. For example, the University of Wisconsin-Madison actually offers resources in helping to develop business plans. You can find some others online as well. And it is entirely possible to do that. But not every proposal needs a business plan. Every proposal does need a plan at the front end, figuring out what we're going to do and the elements we've mentioned. What do grant writers charge? I wouldn't try to assess that. I mean, if anybody else wants to weigh in with your opinions, feel free. I will say, I think it really varies quite a bit. As a general rule, federal funds won't allow their funds to be used for writing, for paying for a grant writer. You'd have to find that funding from other sources. But I will say there, others may have specific numbers and you want to be sharing those, feel free. And Robert saying he thinks goals and objectives are kind of a mini business plan when it's structured that way. Great, thanks. Thanks for your ideas about dollars as well. Anybody else? Yes, we're going to talk about where to look for grants, George. Any other questions before we move to the next session? So one thing that I'm going to propose, and I'll leave it to you all, feel free to put it in the chat if it would be helpful, but I have over the years learned that it's kind of helpful for me to make an offer, and most times people want to accept it. And that is at the end, if we have a bit of time, I will go into a little presentation on the differences between writing for federal or state agencies and writing to foundations and philanthropies. There are such similarities and there are some important strategic differences. And it can be useful to go through that. So just note that I'm open to doing that if we have the time and if people want that. So I see, okay, I'm seeing yes, interested in that so much. All right, let's jump into the next section. And here we go. This is, so you've got a great idea and you've developed a very strategic way of thinking about that project, including finding collaborators among all those people who are interested and bringing them in strategically. That's just one little element that I wanted to emphasize from the previous section. I think when you're putting together a project, it pays to be picky. Sometimes the idea of collaboration kind of gets its own little golden halo that says, oh, you're a collaborator, you're doing, all that is well, all that is good in this world. There are difficult collaborators, you know that? So pick your ones, the ones who are going to really not just talk about what ought to be done, but help carry the water. Pick the ones and, who are going to bring something important. And understand, if you're leading a project, you really you owe it to yourself and to the others involved in it to do that. There's just nothing as miserable as having too many collaborators. You can't get meetings together. It's just not possible to figure out meetings for 10 people on an ongoing basis. Go for a smaller number and make sure every one of them is is willing to help carry the burden. So you got that done. You figured it out. You're strategically thought through, and now you're ready to say, where do I go to find funding? So I'll just give you a moment of history on this workshop. It started when way back I asked that question. My goodness, we worked so hard to get funding and people don't even know about it. And I went to some of my funders and said, how about if we put together a guide about this program, about all the programs we have at the federal level that could be useful. This was back in 95 and 96. And the funders said, yes, let's do that. Great idea. And it turned out that the Sustainable Agriculture Research Education Program, SARE, a very important federal program in our lives, was actually interested in doing it too. And we worked together to do it. And we've worked ever since. After every farm bill, we wait a few months and we put together a guide to federal programs. And the current name is, as you see on the screen, covering sustainable agriculture, forestry, entrepreneurship, conservation, food systems, community development. And we'll go into this in a little more detail later, but and you'll actually cover a lot of the programs Thursday. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the programs today, but I did want to point out that it was because I wanted this guide to not sit and gather dust that I said, how about we do workshops to help people learn how to use the guide and find resources? That was the genesis of the workshops that we do now. And you will see a link here in blue down below that you can go online and get a copy of it there. Also, you can also call a 1-800, you can call a 1-800 number, and that takes you to the ATRA phone numbers, that appropriate technology transfer for rural areas. Wonderful collaborator, and they actually will send out a free copy to you. You can email at that same email address to get a copy. What we have in this guide is it's listed by kind of category, and you will see that, for example, we list federal programs by whether they're dealing with economic development, whether that's farm loans, insurance and risk management, local food systems, value added and marketing innovations. And we've grouped all these programs by those categories. Natural resources conservation, nutrition and consumer food access, renewable energy, energy conservation, research and outreach. So you will be able to quickly see what programs are most relevant, and keep in mind, many programs are relevant to more than one topic. Oh, come now. Another set of sources that could be resources that could be helpful to you. There's years ago, before there was an internet, when I asked this question during the workshop, where would you go to find these resources and learn about programs? Very commonly, the most common answer was libraries, which is still true. And if people feel a little skittish about trying to navigate the internet, sometimes folks do, you can go to your library and ask to talk to the resource librarian. And if it's a library within an area that a large enough area that has a resource librarian, they will be glad to actually help you navigate. I've been told this over and over again as well. If you go to a community college, to their resource, their development office, they too would be willing to help you. Extension services, very often, if the person in your local area doesn't have that expertise, they will be able to send you to somebody who can help you. So don't let not navigating the internet get in your way. But navigating the internet, there are other resources, and I'm only going to list just a few here, but there are more that are listed in the guide that I just showed you. And one of them is a really great guide put together by our close partners at the national level, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. It's called the Grassroots Guide to Federal Farm and Food Programs. The thing that's great about their guide is that there are not as many programs listed, but they can go into more depth, and they update it because it's on the website and as an updated item. We actually make a print copy, and once done, it's done, and it stays done for the remainder until the next farm bill is done. So ours is not updated in the same way. Theirs is, and it goes into some kind of policy-oriented stuff in some cases, but it's a really useful information and a guide for folks wanting hands-on experience in how to use a program. There are other resources that different agencies within USDA offers, like the Ag Marketing Service and NRCS. So those are just examples. One thing to consider when you're looking for resources, think locally. Are there county, city, or state grants? Also, are there private foundations that might want to support a cause like yours? One of the places that you can go, and you'll see its website inside this guide here, but there is the foundation guide. There's a foundation center online, and you can go have a subscription. To use it interactively, you need a subscription, but your library probably has one, and that can help you if you're looking philanthropically. But do those basic internet searches to see what projects, what programs are out there, who has been funded by what. Ask people in your community, your community of work, find out what they have to say. The newsletters like the free philanthropy newsletters around Philanthropy News Digest as an example. You can go to lots of these places and find out where people have found funding. One of the things that's important is to think creatively and broadly about your project's needs. Could multiple types of assistance be useful? For example, way years ago, we were doing this workshop, and there was somebody who said, that she had applied. She was kind of down in the mud. She had applied to SARE once before. She hadn't gotten funded, darn. And what she loved in her life was earthworms. And so people began thinking about where she could go and how she could think about how to argue the case for doing work about earthworms. And people began suggesting things like entrepreneurship, using it as bait. She didn't love that, but she accepted it and heard, there are ways to think about it. You could do it from the perspective of soil health and benefiting soil health. So, people think of earthworms, some earthworms in terms of composting. And how can you argue the value of the enterprise you're wanting to pursue, and what new audiences, what programs might be interested that might not be interested if you only identified it in just the way you have historically? Somebody might want to mute their phone. I mean, their mic, I can sort of hear somebody scuffling it up. Also, probably one of the most strategic things that you need to do is, and we'll come down to where you find this information, but first you want to figure out, how do you identify programs whose purposes and available resources are suited to your purposes? Isn't that obvious? So some questions that you want to ask to try to get there, to try to decide about that alignment. Are you an eligible applicant? For example, you'll hear on Thursday at this workshop more about the value-added producer grant program, but that program only serves farmers and groups of farmers, but it's not available to a group like mine, a nonprofit at Michael Fields Agricultural Institute. You have to be, in some cases, there are programs that are only designed, that are not designed to be applied to by farmers, but serve them. For example, the Beginning Farmer Rancher Development Grant Program. That's one that's designed to help set up the circumstances to support beginning farmers, but a beginning farmer doesn't apply to it. So you want to know that stuff. You want to make sure, this is the one that if I could star it, I could figure out how to put a graphic star, I would. Does your project advance the stated mission of a program and its goals? And of course, does it look to you like the program can advance your hopes and your goals? But the first way I stated it is, I stated it that way because it's actually that against which your proposal is going to be assessed. It's whether your project advances the program's mission and its goals. And it's important to not be dreamy about it. At this point, you got to say, realistically, can I make a case? And we'll talk about, again, where you're going to find that information about that program's mission and goals, but you wanting to be as clear as you can be that what you do advances their stated mission and goals, top, very high priority. Then there's some pragmatic things. Is the program's form of assistance appropriate to your needs? Sometimes programs are great at providing great technical assistance, but you're looking for dollars. Suppose they have dollars. How big is its funding pool? What's the average amount that program has funded? And what's the duration of the grants? Are they grants for 1 year, but you really need 3 years? Or what are they offering? What do you need? Is funding available? This is an important one, and sometimes not what people are thinking at the front end. Very, very many, not all, federal programs fund on a reimbursement basis. You have to have paid out the money up front, and then you get reimbursed for what your approved expenditures. But it's not that money comes in a great big check at the front end. And so it's important to know that up front. If it's important to have money at the front end, can you navigate that, and can you negotiate that with the program? Some programs you can. Programs are really different. Don't assume because you've had experience with one that's going to pertain to every other. So what are those eligibility requirements? Also, another set of questions is about match. Remember, we were talking about match before? It's what you have toward the total amount that you need. What do you actually have? And particularly many programs, not all, require match. Some programs, and that the amount that is required can vary quite a bit from one program to another. And it's important to also know that some programs offer some restrictions on a program's use. As an example, I just mentioned the value-added producer grant program, such an important program, and it is designed to pay people to do market feasibility studies and business plans, and some of the planning grant, they have a planning grant component to it, and it can also offer working capital. What it won't cover is what some people call bricks and mortar. It won't cover that building for the processing of the commodity that you're working on. It won't cover the construction of a building, for example. So that's, every program will have some things that it will say you can do with it and you can't, just obviously as can be, but all federal programs will say you can't use it for lobbying, but that's not a very common, that's not the most interesting one. Most people aren't looking to go there, but just to say restrictions do apply in some cases, you really need to know what they are. Also, of course, timing, there's several timing questions. Are the deadlines associated with this program? Are they like, did you just discover the program and the deadline is 2 weeks from now and you probably don't have time to get it in, or is it just passed? What is the deadline for application, and what kind of funding timeframes? For example, some programs wonderfully offer a pre-proposal stage. It's intended to use everybody's time as much, as efficiently as possible, so that people who really aren't suited to a program and don't stand a great chance don't kill themselves trying to get an application and that doesn't stand a great chance. It gives people an early screen, but it also adds more time to the length of time from when you first put in your pre-proposal to when you might get funded. So those are all considerations. Also, does the program fund multi-year projects, if that's what you need? A last question is one having to do with just what I call the hassle factor. Do past grantees think that the program's reporting requirements are reasonable? The program is well administered, they're easy to work with? Those are all legitimate questions. Now you come to, how do you figure out the answers? One of the very most obvious, but not necessarily if you didn't happen to read the book on every acronym in the world, is reading the call for proposals, sometimes called a request for proposals, RFP, or a notice of solicitation of applications, a NOSA, or a request for applications. They're all these acronyms. They basically mean the same thing. This program's offering dollars, it's offering applications, certain timeline. And if you read this document, you will learn a tremendous amount about what you need to know to answer most of the questions we just asked. Usually, the RFP is just a nuisance in the world to read. It's just really irritating how badly written so many of them are. Don't hate it. Just come into it expecting. You might have to read it a few times. And in fact, you'll see when we say grant writing, we urge you to read it several times. No question, that will get you much further down the road than practically any other piece of advice we give you. Just read it and follow its instructions, because it will tell you so much about deadlines, about intention, about purpose, about mission, about limitations on use, on eligibility, on time, all these things you'll learn, including format, etc. A lot of programs, not all, and not all consistently, but very often do offer a webinar for potential applicants. And most commonly, that webinar is recorded. So you can go, even if you couldn't attend the webinar, you can go back and listen and find out a bunch of answers to questions that you very likely have. And a lot of those questions tend to get answered in those webinars. And it's really an important resource that wasn't around, not so very many years ago. So that's a very important way to answer your questions. Suppose you have a question that just isn't quite answered there, call the program staff. I'm sure that people on Thursday from our various programs that Diane is arranging have come. They will all nod their heads and say, please call us if you've got questions. But first, do your due diligence, get your information best you can, and you may very well answer your question yourself. For some questions, like the hassle factor, you're not going to find it in the RFP. For that, see if you can figure out online who's been funded by them before and get in touch with a past grantee. So that's where I plan to pause and see if we have questions about this. I'm scrolling through.
Margaret, we have one question from someone that was sent directly to me that I want to share with you. Is this person was asking in kind of in response to your point to identify what problem you're trying to solve. The question was, well, what if there are several problems? How do you choose which one you highlight? So if your project idea actually solves multiple problems.
Super question. And it really is a strategic one. So thanks for bringing it up. So we'll come into that a bit more in the grant writing, but even it's still germane when you're choosing which program you're going to apply to. It may mean that you're going to apply to more than one program, because it may be that one program is particularly suited to addressing one aspect of it. Suppose, for example, you're wanting to do something that has to do with the benefits of small grains in a crop rotation, and you're also wanting to do some value added product development and marketing. So you might have a proposal for somebody who's interested in having you do some agronomic research and on-farm research, and that could be a SARE grant, for example. And you might think about a local food development, marketing development grant, farmers market promotion program, for example, for the direct marketing aspect of that same thing. But the first thing to do is always ask, what's the question, or what are the questions? And then for each of those questions, is there a program, first of all, that actually wants to help me answer that question, that wants to help me solve that problem? You're looking to find the synergy, and not every program wants to, and don't tear your hair out about it. That's not where you go. You go in a different direction. So it's really a strategic question, and you have to answer it yourself. But the more familiar you are with more programs, the easier it will be for you to say, this doesn't seem like it's a good fit here. Maybe this other aspect of it is.
Margaret, Lucretia also just mentioned, and it's kind of what you're saying too, but my point earlier about, maybe that you can section out your project into different phases over a timeline as well as another way to think about that. And so really prioritizing top priorities or top issues that seem like they could be addressed the soonest, and then maybe look at those other pieces that still might all align with one funder, but that you might need to do it in subsequent applications, just depending. And then George also asked, how often is it important to collaborate with the university?
Great. Thank you for your thoughts, and also great question. So it's not always necessary to collaborate with the university. Universities are really important collaborators on some projects, not all. I mean, there are projects that really have to do with market, where the people who are going to work with you on your market development may or may not be with the university. They may be more in the private sector. That's cool. It depends on what the program, again, what it's going to really determine that is what kind of project you're looking for and what kind of program you're seeking. If you're going to a SARE proposal to make a SARE application, Diane can speak to this, and undoubtedly will speak more to it on Thursday. But there will be opportunities and benefits to working with a university, and whether it's extension or the research components of a university, those kinds of collaborations are what SARE's strengths are. So they're going to look very, very favorably, and in some cases would require it. Other projects not. So it just depends on what your project is and what you're trying to get done. I see a question down here. Does the size of the farm determine the allocation? So I think what you mean is, like, if you're getting a grant. Now, I will say that you might also be thinking about conservation programs here. I'm not quite sure, but the amount of funding that you could get will be influenced by a couple of things. One is the amount of funding that that program is offering as its limit, its top limit. So that's one consideration. But another one is what you actually demonstrate that you need. So I've certainly been on grant reviews where the applicant made a case that it was an important proposal, but they didn't make a case for their budget. And the budget, they overinflated their amount and they didn't defend it convincingly. And so it was cut down. It didn't have to do with the size of the farm. It had to do with the compelling defense of the need for the amount that they were seeking. Now, I can't think of an example where the size of the farm was going to determine an allocation, but I would say that there are certain like conservation programs where the conservation program may prefer to be working with a smaller or a larger size for a certain practice. But I mean, I don't really in general think so. I think that I think that as a general rule, you can make your case why this practice that you want to get funded from NRCS, or why this initiative that you're undertaking with other partners to accomplish XYZ, it can be as compelling for a small farmer as a large farmer. But it is going to depend upon you to make your case. The Thursday's webinar will not be the same as this one. It's going to be looking at a lot of individual programs. Today is more conceptual, and then on Thursday we'll be looking at specifically a lot of different specific programs. And Diane's brought folks in. If you want to say anything further about that, Diane.
Sorry, Margaret, I was responding to a question in the chat. Can you repeat what you were?
Sure. The Thursday webinar be essentially the same as this one, and I'm saying, yeah, it's going to be different. It's going to be looking more at individual programs, and you're bringing in program staff to talk about those.
Right.
Different.
And the programs that we'll cover will be the Value-Added Producer Grant Program, the SARE Farmer Rancher Grant Program, the Wisconsin Producer-Led Watershed Grant Program. And then there's a bunch of other programs funded through DATCAP. We won't be able to cover all of those programs funded through the Department of Agriculture in Wisconsin. So
Sure.
Thursday's webinar will be a little more region and state specific, although the first presentation has national application.
Great, thanks. I'm going to do one last question, then I'm going to move this on so that we can have time for more Q&A later. We may be able to come back to the other questions. But I see Millie's question. Are there specific professional niceties to calling program staff with questions aside from due diligence? I'm always worrying I'm missing a hidden rule and it'll reflect poorly on my application. I think it's that fear that keeps people from calling. And I got to say, you can practically see tears in the eyes of program staff when we are doing this webinar in person, and they're sitting there in the back of the room when I say, call the program staff, and they're shaking their head as hard as they can without it falling off, saying, yes, call us. So I think you got to assume that if you ask a question that has been clearly articulated in the RFP, or was clearly articulated in the webinar, it would not be strategic to call because it will make you look like you didn't do your due diligence. But if you have a question that is maybe tailored to your own application and it's not obvious, and a reasonable person wouldn't be able to draw a conclusion about its application to your situation, call that program staff. And don't feel uncomfortable about it. It will not reflect poorly on your application. And it is very common that the people who are reviewing the proposals may not be the same people. That is a thing to learn. It's worth asking. But as a general rule, you oughtn't assume that that person out there in front who's answering questions is the person making the decisions. Usually there's a different process for that. So I'm going to move on ahead now and continue to appreciate other people's opinions as you're weighing in on this. This is really constructive and very communitarian. So I am coming back to sharing my screen, and Wren, take it away. Basics of grant writing.
Yep, so we'll cover these bullet points here, sound practices, things to avoid, commonly requested attachments. We'll also cover the budget a little bit more and then getting additional help through other resources. Okay, so let's just start with the obvious. Get organized, be organized is the most important thing you can do for a successful grant application. So starting early is essential. And this is coming from a notorious procrastinator right here. So this has been a hard one for me to learn, but it's so important. So start as early as possible. You'll always need more time than you expect, especially the more people that are involved in your application, the more partners, the more letters you have to get, whatever it is, budget information. It takes a while. What I would recommend doing is looking at the application deadline and then working backwards from there and creating a timeline based on that deadline and all the steps you need to get done between today and that deadline. Any accounts that you need to set up, SAMS is going to be a big one. And Margaret, I don't recall if we're going to talk more about SAM in this outside of right now.
Just a little bit, yeah, under electronic submissions.
Okay, so we'll talk more about that. Often, so for anything federal, you'll need a SAM ID and you'll apply through grants.gov. If you're applying through state or federal or SARE, it's pretty common now to be applying through an online portal. Very rarely do they have you mail in or email an application. Those are still used. I still see those archaic methods used, but it's pretty much always going to be a portal. So make sure you get your your account set up right away to make sure you're not missing anything last minute. And you also are often pulling all of the actual application questions from that portal anyway. So you need to get in there to see what the application is going to look like. That's not the case with most federal grants. You'll see it in their RFP, but just covering kind of the range of possibilities with different funders you might be looking at applying through. And then check all assumptions again on how long any part of the application will take. So for example, let's bring up letters of support. A huge part of most federal applications. And you rely heavily, obviously, on other people to get those letters in. What's kind of nice about the letters of support is once you kind of know what you're doing with your project, you can get your template sent off. We often recommend sending a template, creating a template for your partners. That way they can plug in their unique information and also have some language from the grant ready to go, so they kind of know, exactly what you're applying for. And then you can be working on that as soon as you have that, early on in the application process, get those sent off. And then while they're, getting those back to you, you can be working on other parts of the application. So I always recommend to what can I be multitasking on, and we'll look at a chart here in a moment to help with some of that. So again, just creating that timeline and always starting as early as possible. Margaret mentioned earlier, reading the RFP at least 3 times.
Didn't mean to do that.
That's all right. So, so I'll often or just generally refer to the guidelines, and that's if I say guidelines, that means the RFP essentially. So I'm a printer. I like to print. I like to highlight and underline. Otherwise, I miss things. Especially with those federal applications, like Margaret was saying, they're not pretty. They're not always the easiest to read. So whatever you need to do, whatever your process is, do that, but do it multiple times. What I also recommend is using an outline. So I really recommend, again, everybody has their own process, but pulling out all the questions from a template that you will often get, or from a online portal, putting it into a Word document or a Google document and working from that. One, that makes it easier to share with other groups. 2, you're not missing an edit that you made if you had actually done the whole thing in the template and then you send off an error. So it just makes it easier, helps you stay more organized. Often, I know Google Docs does it, and I believe Word probably has it too. You can actually create an outline where you click on certain headings and it takes you to the section. That's really helpful for these big federal applications. And then break your work into sections, and we'll look at, again, an example here in a moment of how to do that. Most federal applications will have a checklist. So that's just another way to stay organized. I use that in tandem with an outline, and that includes your application attachments that you're going to need, all the different sections of the narrative part of the application, etc. So This is one example of how you might organize a big application. So on the left-hand side, you have your different components of an application, your cover letter, project summary, you have your evaluation plan, all the sections, and also some, different topics that you kind of have to make sure you're including economic, environmental, and social at the bottom there, which would be what like a SARE proposal would want you to make sure you're addressing. If you're having multiple people work on this application with you, you might, have a task list, like who's responsible for which piece, when those different pieces are due, et cetera. So this may not be the best approach for you. Again, this is one example of how to keep yourself organized, especially with a larger team.
One little quick note on this particular example, that everything starts off red and then it converts to yellow once things are starting to get worked on by somebody and they're saying, oh, or orange, maybe, whatever you think it is. It's, getting moving on it, starting, here's the deadline by which I'm going to have it done. And then once it's green, boom, we've all agreed it's done, it's finished. Everybody's looked at it who wants to look at it, and it's approved, ready to go. So that's if you're doing a collective thing, it sort of helps to let everybody know where you stand in terms of your tasks. That's what this is intended to accomplish.
Morgan, I see your note. Thank you for that. I will slow down for sure. So some basic grant writing tips and tools. Again, some of these feel obvious, but I think it's really important to say, just be as clear as possible. Getting a lot of different eyeballs on your application is highly recommended. So getting people that are really familiar with the project and also people that may not be super familiar with the project. Once you have a solid draft, get some additional eyes on it. What I really recommend is you can safely assume that most reviewers or all the reviewers, especially for federal grants, are going to be in the ag sector, but they may not be in your particular part of the ag sector. So they may not know about tree crops, for example, or vegetable production. They might be, a rancher or something. And so just don't make assumptions that everybody reviewing this are going to know what your acronyms mean or your particular, even, where you are geographically. And often they'll ask you to kind of expand on that too. So just be clear, use simple language. You don't have to super dumb it down, but I don't use a lot of jargon that may not be familiar to like everybody in the ag world. Margaret touched on this earlier, be really clear about how you are going to advance the goals of the funder. I don't know if we touched on this explicitly yet. I just want to really caution against, and this is just a little bit of a tangent, but it can be very easy to be in a position, as most of us are, where we really need funding to do our work. And you see a funder or a funding program that looks awesome. And then you ask yourself, how can I get that funding? We really advise against trying to form or create a project that may actually not be in line with what you are normally doing on a day-to-day basis just to get that funding. So really avoid trying to stretch your work, your organization, or your farm to meet a funder's goals, because it's just not, one, it'll probably shine in the application that it's not quite aligned. It's also going to, stretch your capacity in a way that probably isn't going to be sustainable. Next bullet here, be precise, accurate, don't exaggerate. Develop your proposals, small team of collaborators. So we've talked about that quite a bit, I think. And as I mentioned, have other people review, again, asking those same questions. Is this clear? Is it logical? Is it logical throughout the whole application? So another thing I'll emphasize here in a moment, but I'll repeat it a few times, is, really making sure that your information that's in your narrative part of your proposal, your budget, and any other sections, you could almost draw, I'm not quite there yet, sorry, Margaret. You could almost, if you could lay them out in print them out and lay them out in a line across your desk or something, you could draw a line and make sure that the language you're using in each piece of those is reflected, is the same. That's an error I see a lot, where you wrote something in your budget or your budget narrative, we want funds for this activity, and it's not mentioned anywhere else in your narrative. So that's a big error. You just want to make sure that it's very consistent throughout your application as well. All right, thank you, Margaret. Yeah, go ahead. Did you want to add?
Nope. Just moving to the next one.
Okay, great. All right, so getting into the budget and budget narrative, and I honestly feel like this could be like a workshop in itself, especially federal proposals. Your budget is going to be a lot more involved, a lot more pieces, a lot more detail needed. So it's pretty common that you will need both a budget and a budget narrative. So when you're filling out your applications through, grants.gov, you will be filling out their budget template in their portal, and so it will very much look like kind of like a spreadsheet that you'll be plugging in your numbers. But you're also going to need a budget narrative to justify each part of your budget. And so that looks like, and I don't know how easily people can see the actual words on this screen, but it is exactly how it sounds. So it's you describing each part of that line item, the details of it. So, if it's a personnel, if it's a staff person you're asking for funding for, you're going to be, justifying it by saying this person works this many hours, and it's this % of their salary that we're asking for funds for. Just a quick side note, and I don't know how much more we'll get into this today, but a lot of funders will not allow for general operating expenses. So any personnel costs that are outside of the project that you are applying for, they won't allow for. So when you're creating your budget for personnel, for example, you'll want to make sure you're just identifying the part of the project that staff person is working on, the percentage of their time overall. If they work 40 hours a week, maybe they're only working, 5 to 10 hours a week on the project if you get funded. And so what percentage of their salary does that equate to? Things like that. So they really want to see as much as possible to make sure that you understand what your costs are and that it feels reasonable in their eyes. And I know sometimes that can be tricky. Well, what is a reasonable salary and things like that? If they don't explicitly say in the RFP or the guidelines, that is often something they'll address in a webinar or through follow-up questions. And Margaret, you might have more to say on that. So list sources of match. So we talked about match already a little bit. I did want to mention just quickly, I'm seeing it more common that funders are waiving or reducing the match amount required, especially for underserved farmers. So that's something to keep your eye out for. I'm also seeing some grant opportunities that don't have a match at all. I personally think match is inequitable. I'm not a big fan of it. So I'm excited to see some changes in that. But anyway, so just keep your eyes out for those potential for varying match requirements. Let's see, and I kind of already mentioned, making sure your language in your budget narrative is consistent with the rest of your application.
So the one little thing that I'm going to add in here, thank you, that was great. One little thing I'm going to add is for organizations, nonprofits, for example, who are applying, we always struggle with this issue of getting our administrative costs covered because it takes money to make an organization function, and not everything can be on a project basis. You need to have overhead. And this can be a snarly area in a federal program. Some programs I just finished, thankfully, I'm happy to say, getting the funding, but it took actually a few months of back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on what exactly they how I could calculate that indirect cost. It was a perfect example of an illustration of why it paid to have created a relationship with the people in the program, because we walked back and forth on this thing. And in the end, kind of by the skin of our teeth, we got it done before the end of the fiscal year on September the 30th, but it's not my favorite way to go about doing that. We started in July. So just be aware that can be a tender area, and some organizations actually apply to get an agreement, a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement. NICRA is what it stands for, and it's basically saying you are going to negotiate with the federal government and say that you're going to be allowed to get 25% or 35% or whatever percent it's going to be. Otherwise, it will typically default to 10%. So on you go.
And I did have a while we're on the topic of match, and somebody did reach out to ask, can we talk more about what match is? So just briefly, so match is it's essentially a way for a funder to feel confident that you have some stake in the game, essentially, that you are contributing something to this project, whether it's financial, staff, etc. So match can look like actual dollars or in kind. So, match could be, we'll have, 10 hours of staff time contributed to this project. You're not asking for the funder to fund that time. You are essentially not donating it to the project, but you are contributing it to the project. And so funders want to see varying degrees of match. Sometimes it's $1 for $1. So if you ask for 50,000 from the funder, they're going to want to see 50,000. Again, whether that's in kind or whether that's cash. Partners can also contribute match. I think this is one of those topics that could be a longer conversation and maybe its own mini workshop. So I don't know, Margaret, if you want to chime in any more about kind of defining match. It is an important one because so many federal grants do require it. And apologies, dogs. It is something that I would recommend following up with the funder on if you're still confused about it or not sure how to contribute to it. But it can be a barrier sometimes, and I think funders realize that it's just it's so ingrained in the system oftentimes.
Yeah, I do think it's important, and it's also an opportunity for being strategic. So I'll give you a quick example of that. Years ago, in putting in a proposal for a small project in our community, we were developing an outdoor garden, an outdoor classroom, and we wanted to demonstrate match. But as it happened, I was very anxious to, though this school is in a wealthier part of town, the school serves a very, very diverse socioeconomic profile of students. And I wanted the city, whose money we were seeking, to not assume, oh, those rich fat cats, they don't need any money. So I made a point in the match of we only asked for stuff in the proposal, and we matched with personnel. So we got volunteers to do the landscape architectural designs, and we got volunteers to do the planting and to do the infrastructure assembly and so forth and so on, so that it was clear that we weren't looking for money to line anybody's pockets. It was all stuff. And it really did help us, I think, in that proposal. But match, how you match and with what you match can be very strategic. So just note that. Why don't we go ahead and do this on the quick side so we can keep moving along?
So we kind of mentioned letters of support a few times. So for those grants that require it, again, most federal grants will require it. This is an opportunity for your partners, people that you have identified as helping with the project or will be supporting the project to some degree, or depending, you're just getting community engagement, essentially showing community engagement. They will want a letter of support. The funder will want a letter of support. So it's a little tricky here. They want you to have them unique. They want each person, us, giving the letter of support to give a unique statement. But what I also recommend, like I said earlier, is providing a template. So it's okay to give a general template, saying, here's the project that we're doing, and thank you for considering this grant application. We fully support it as, Farmer X or, Co-op X or whatever. But somewhere in the middle of that, have them create kind of a unique, like why this is going to be beneficial to them or what they see the benefit as. Make sure you understand the review process of a grant program. So a lot of the federal grants and other funders as well, including SARE, will have their breakdown of how they're going to review. So kind of the metrics and what percentage or what weight that particular section of an application will get. So I've been using that more and more to help develop my proposal. And I think it's really helped. You're getting a sense of exactly how the reviewers are going to be reading and what they're going to be kind of checking off. And then last, of course, this ties into, making sure you have plenty of time for your application, identify weakest aspects of your proposal, give yourself time to fix it. And again, you do this through getting other people to review it, maybe stepping away for a day or two and coming back to your proposal, whatever process you need. But give yourself plenty of time to do any final tweaks. Going up right to that deadline makes it really hard to make sure that you have the strongest proposal possible.
Thanks. I'm going to do one little quick editorial comment, which under letters of support, over the years, I've really gotten to when I have somebody that I've called and said, would you be willing to offer a letter? Increasingly, it's a letter of commitment. That is to say, if I'm evaluating as a reviewer, a letter of support says, this is a really great proposal and meets an important need, and I really love it, versus a letter that says, this is a really important proposal, meets an extremely important need. I love it. And here's what I'm going to commit to doing. That's going to be a stronger letter. And so I tend increasingly to make these letters of commitment, even when they're not specifically asked for in that way. And then the other thing is increasingly, I just figure it's easier for me to go the extra bit of work and draft out a letter as opposed to just thinking points. I do thinking points, but increasingly I say, would it be helpful for you? I can send you some thinking points, or I'm happy to draft you a letter. And people about 100% of the time say, oh, why don't you draft a letter? And I always say, please tweak it as you would like to make it feel like it's your own. But I think it allows me the opportunity to not have them look alike. Because as a reviewer, I've certainly sat on panels where people were docked for having very similar letters. It looks like you just filled out a template, as opposed to it looks like this is coming straight from your heart. And I have certainly seen proposals where the letters of commitment were so passionately written, it knocked everybody's socks off, and we all wanted that proposal to go forward. It was so effective. And so those letters of support might as well make them the big, strong advocacy opportunity that they can be. So
and I'll just say too, Margaret, I wasn't going to get too in the weeds about it, but I am seeing it is the case that often funders will say, we don't want just letters of support. So you just have to read the RFP very clearly to see what they want for letters. They might really only want committed partners, partners that are actually contributing either in-kind support or something to the project, a contract or whatever. They might not just want like the mayor, to say, "Yay, I love this project and I support it." So you just really have to read the guidelines to be really clear about who they want letters from.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll just wrap this up. I think this was my last slide, Margaret, or close to it for this section. Okay, so follow the template, the application template, the format exactly as they have it. Don't change the font, don't change the size of the font. Just follow exactly as it is. You can be docked sometimes if you alter an application format. I feel like we've covered getting matching funds, named partners, signatures lined up as soon as possible. And readjusting your proposal for each program. Again, Margaret talked about your project may be eligible for different funders, different funding programs. I believe that's what you're referring to in this bullet, Margaret. And so just know that you will probably have to do some editing. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of funding opportunities that allow you to submit the same application. That would be nice, and I hope we get there one day, but that's not the case. So just be prepared to adjust for each different funder. And then of course, submitting well in advance of the deadline is huge. It can be the case that you submit and you get an error message. And if you're submitting that, 5 minutes before the deadline at midnight or 11:59, you may not have time to adjust that error. And I think we're on to you, Margaret. Were you taking over the electronic submissions?
I'm happy to do that. Yeah, basically. So it's a reinforcement of that point, just planning enough time to register, getting your SAMS registration, getting your unique electronic identifier for organizations that need that. These are not hard to do. This is not a hard process, but you need to give yourself enough time that if there's a glitch in it, you can work it through. For whatever reason, this summer, suddenly the Michael Fields Agricultural Institute we had changed the official address from facing on one road to facing in another direction. It was the same building, same place, but it got a different address. And we had to make sure that that was changed, or maybe it was just that they did not have properly Michael Fields Agricultural Institute Inc. That may have been what it was. But anyway, there was a slight glitch. They didn't recognize our SAM number, and I nearly lost a proposal because no matter how many times we went back, you know, our executive director had to really work it through with Sam. So having the time meant that we got that done in time, that we did get the proposal. Yay. So it's just heartbreaking to go to all the work and not have it done because the conduit gets gunked up. So make sure you give yourself the time. There have been proposals a few years back. We had several applicants here in the state for the Beginning Farmer Rancher Development Grant Program. And that grants.gov interface got jammed with a whole bunch of defense proposals and everything else. A whole bunch of programs at the same time were submitting, and there was just too long an electronic line. People couldn't get through, and I knew people who didn't get their proposal considered. That's really dreadful. So just a few things, just to be a kind of a downer person here. A few things to avoid. Over the years, I used to do this grant writing workshop with various other folks, and I noticed some of them, they went heavily into the not tips for grant writing, but things you should never do. And I ended up thinking, well, maybe I'll mention a few of those too. You know, it's less true now. It used to be when we would get hard copy as a reviewer, when we would get hard copy proposals to review, we'd every so often get one of these things that was huge, way out of proportion. They had sent everything else you can imagine. And, you know, as a reviewer, you didn't think, oh, brilliant. You were kind of inclined to roll your eyes. It didn't improve your standing with the reviewers to make them slog through a bunch of stuff that was extraneous. So don't include the materials that aren't requested. If you're perfectly clear that there's something that wasn't requested, but you think it's a compelling thing to add, you might call the program staff and say, what do you think about my adding this really great newspaper article that sums up our project so brilliantly? You know, ask that. Again, don't exaggerate, be accurate. Don't assume that one program's expectations will be like another. It's really different from one program to another. If you're not sure, ask. And finally, don't be discouraged. If you're turned down by a program, find out why before writing another. Here's a typical grant application format. This is like, what are you going to do and why? What's the need? What are the goals and objectives? What facts support that? What are the steps that you plan to take to reach the goal or goals? What is the timeline that you're going to operate on to get those things done? And sometimes they'll ask about your story, your organization. Why are you a great candidate to fund? Your personnel credentials. Whoops, sorry about that. I can't wiggle with this thing at all. Oh my, sorry. There we go. Personnel credentials. And then the budget, same kind of thing, keeping in mind that sometimes with federal programs, they're going to ask you not only your expense budget, but they're going to ask you to break down your budget by the objectives. Like suppose you have 3 basic objectives on that budget sheet that you will see that you got a link to that kind of walks through how to do a budget. You'll see they have 4 objectives in that. And so you have to go through and say, this objective is going to use this amount of money, and it's going to be matched by this other amount of money. So we're asking you for this, and we're seeking X amount, and we are matching with X or Y amount. And you go through that by each objective, and then you'll see how it also plays out in terms of expenses. So there are 2 ways you're going to have to think about your budgets. And then again, budget narrative. Communications and outreach, it's not uncommon. It isn't universal, but sometimes they'll say, how will you communicate about your work and to whom? And then how will you measure your progress toward the goals and objectives? Does this sound familiar to you? Does it remind you of the very beginning of how you frame out a good project and design it? It's very similar. A few required common attachments, not always. Again, these support or commitment letters, list of the organization's officers and directors, the income and expense statements for the past year, projected income and expense statements for the current year, project budget, the most recent 990, the audited financial statement notes, our federal tax exemption determination letters, the project or program budget, and then maybe an annual report. I just finished doing a grant proposal last week, and it required maybe about 4 of these. So it varies. Some federal grants are going to give you a whole bunch of other things like commitments to not lobby, conflict of interest statements, current and pending support, not all this other stuff. You can just don't stress yourself out about it. Get it done. It's not hard. It's just kind of pro forma. Lots of places to go get help. Many people come from this explanation in this workshop and go, oh my gosh, it's a little overwhelming. Where do you go to get help? And there are places that you can go. And, of course, we've already said, listen to the webinars, talk to the program staff if you need to, but go to the librarians if you're needing help in navigating. Talk to your friends, to your colleagues, to your local extension person, to local development agencies. Find people who care about the thing you're trying to get done and are willing to help you. And if you're finding yourself with a love-hate relationship with the website that is the website that we all love to hate, and that's www.grants.gov, they do have an incredibly well-staffed, round-the-clock, 365 days a year helpline. And I have used it and I have been impressed with it. So a few more resources to help you. I'm just going to tell you Michael Fields' website offers a bunch of documents. Many of you have gone there because you will see some of these very documents here that you are encouraged to download. You can go and download those. And then we have the incomparable Wren Almitra, who is our free grants advisor, and she helps people in the Midwest. She won't write grant proposals for people, but she will help you figure out what you're trying to get done, help you navigate and thinking through how to design a project, think about what programs might make sense to apply, or sometimes, quite honestly, help you discover that what you need isn't so much money, it's something else. Maybe you need technical assistance. But you can also get help from her and get put on her list to send notices of what funding resources are available. Now, I had said at the very beginning that I would offer to do a quick summary of comparisons between writing for federal programs and state programs, agency programs, and foundations. We're running short on time, so I'd like either thumbs up or thumb sideways. Yes, do you want me to spend that time? We can do that. It'll take about 2 or 3 minutes. Thumbs up. I see a couple. Any thumbs downs? I'm not seeing them, but I wouldn't necessarily see everybody.
But Margaret, maybe you just want to also leave yourself, maybe very quickly, and leave yourself at least 5 minutes, because there are a number of questions that have been asked in the chat.
Super. Let's go there. Okay, so I will do a very quick one. So the most important thing to know that's similar, like that list of what goes into a proposal, it's very similar. That's what foundations want to know. It's what federal agencies want to know, or state agencies want to know. Like, what are you trying to get done, and so forth. And that, how are you going to do it? Who's going to do it? What's your budget? What's your match? Those are basic things. And, evaluation and communications, those are quite common. A difference is federal and state programs typically are available one time a year. Most commonly, you will have one whack at that once a year. And also fairly common is the fact that the program staff is not the person who's the gatekeeper. They may be a person who can help advise people about how to think about their proposals. They may weigh in, but they're not the gatekeeper. With foundations, it's different. The program officer, who's the staff person working for the foundation for a designated subject area, that person's job is to make a recommendation to the board regarding how much, what proposals they think are the best ones. So when you're talking to that program officer, you're talking to the gatekeeper. You enter that sphere as an advocate. You come in understanding that you're going to make your case. I very typically try to get somebody whom I know has been funded by that foundation, whom I admire, is going to say something nice about me. I will approach them and say, may I use your name? And first, can you tell me anything I need to know about that gatekeeper, about the foundation, or what they're doing these days that's not obvious on their website? And then, can you tell me anything about it? And may I use your name? And soliciting an opportunity to have a conversation with that program officer. And the other thing to note is that it is not uncommon for there to be multiple times. In fact, it's probably most common that there are multiple times in a year when the program officer goes to the board and says, here, this is what I'm recommending. And so that docket, that periodic docket, you're going to try to talk to the program officer and find out where you come in and can be best considered. That's a quick and very quick and dirty comparison between them. Let's jump to some of the top questions. And Diane or Wren, you've been looking at them. You want to weigh in on how to navigate through here?
There are a lot of questions about match, Margaret. Some of them have been addressed a little bit in the chat, but questions including whether one can apply for a loan to cover match, or questions about if you're doing in-kind match, how do you justify how you value that in-kind match?
Really great question. So for example, if I am using people's time and they're volunteering their time, say, I consider what is the rate at which I would be paying them. If I'm using my mileage as time, I use the federal mileage rate and I multiply that. I use that in my budget calculations for anything I'm going to seek as well. So I'm figuring out what it is that I would pay for the thing that is being provided, the thing that I either have or one of my partners has that they're contributing. And I do evaluation. What would I actually pay for that thing? And that's the amount I use. For example, when I'm working with farmers on our state watershed program, I say, so how much would it cost you to go and rent a piece of equipment? If you have that piece of equipment, how much would you have to pay to rent it? And that can be the rental rate that we attribute.
And Wren had a good comment about the loans, and which is basically read the call for proposals, because it will tell you whether that's an acceptable way to do a match.
I would say in general, that's pretty unorthodox in my own experience. I would not say that that's a very common approach to match, is using loans. It would be something that I would probably want to check with the program officer, with the program staff, pardon me.
Diane, in addition to this recording being available, I can't recall, is the presentation also going to be able to be shared? There are some questions about some of the particular slides.
Oh, yes, we can do that as long as Margaret provides it to me. I can absolutely use it. Yeah.
Happy to do. Of course, you'll be able to see it when you look at this, but yes, I'm happy to send the presentation. I'm looking through some of these other match questions or other questions in the chat. Is there a clearinghouse to search by topic grants available to be applied for? Well, I wonder, Donald, if you came in toward the end, because we went over one of them. There are a couple. One of them is this one I can't see.
Margaret, yeah, the camera doesn't pick it up because of the.
All right, here we go. Here it is. Here it is. Yeah. It's a guide, and you will see it in the materials that Diane sent out ahead of this call, and they're also in the chat up near the top. It's a guide that we've put together. You can find it on our website, michaelfieldsaginst.org.
I'll repost that link again.
Yeah, that would be great. And we have it, and you can also get this by going to the National Center for Appropriate Technology, NCAT, and they have a they are willing to send it out to you, and you can make a phone call to them and ask them to send you a free copy, and they will do that. I can give you that number easily right this minute. That's 1-800-346-9140. 346-9140. So that's an easy place to get a lot of these materials. Another place that you can go is another one that I referenced in the workshop earlier, and that is you can go to the guide that the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition puts together also after each farm bill, which is a guide to federal farm and food programs. And it's updated. This is once we've done it, it's done. And they do theirs. It goes into a little bit more policy stuff, but it's still really helpful and a great resource. You can also go to grants.gov, which will help you. You can ask them to send you notices of publications, of the publishing of RFPs. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, to go to foundations, you can go to and seek the foundation directory. You can go to the library and ask the librarian to assist you in getting that. Let's just
want to add one other question that came to me directly, which is there a way that people can see examples of successful grant proposals? And that is actually surprisingly difficult. You can see often the projects that were successful, but the actual grant proposal is considered kind of a private document that is not typically shared publicly. Sometimes I have worked, Sarah has provided a couple of general examples of successful proposals, but that's not a typical and easily reachable thing.
Sure. So one thing I used to say at the beginning of this is, I hope you come away saying, man, that was obvious. I know we will have succeeded, because my basic contention is it's not that hard to do grant writing. It's, in fact, an exercise in just getting specific about things you kind of would have thought about if you'd given it a whole lot of thought, but you might not have given it a lot of thought, and you would have stayed back in the shadows being a little bit scared. So the idea is, don't feel afraid. You can do this thing. And, many of us have done nothing but operate on the basis of having written grants for many, many years. And I've got a 35-year something career that's all about having based it on writing grants. You can do this. And when you don't get funded, let me just ask people who have had this experience. People, put your cameras on if you're willing, and just raise your hand, or maybe you can do yours if you'd like to. Diane asked the survey, but raise your hand if you've written a proposal before. Just put your hand up so everybody can see if you've written proposals before. Proposals, keep them up, 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 keep them up. Have you written proposals before? And then put your hand down if you've not gotten, if there's ever been one you didn't get. If you've gotten every single proposal, keep your hand up. There you go. That's the truth of grant writing. None of us is going to get every single grant proposal we write. So what do you all do when you don't get it funded? Weigh in. You can take yourselves off mic and just speak up real quickly. What would you say? What would you do? Write another one. Try again. I like these notes in the chat. That's great. Anything else?
Ask why you didn't get it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Ask for feedback. Great. Be patient with the process. This is excellent. So don't feel shy. Ask for feedback, and then consider, is this in fact the best fit? Maybe I should look for a different program. And if you think it is a good fit, figure out what you need to do the next time to adjust it. Thank you so much, everybody. And keep in mind, we really are delighted. Wren is just a terrific free grants advisor and there to help. So feel free, if you've got questions, reach out. She's there to help you. And I look forward to seeing folks on Thursday.
Yes, very much so. And you use the same link that you used today to join Thursday's webinar.
Thank you so much, Diane. Likewise, Andrew and other partners.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Wren, for a wonderful presentation with a lot of really, really useful information.
Thanks so much.